Okay, so I want to give you some basic advice on how to prepare for ethics. Ethics is 15% of your exam, so it is extremely important. A lot of people don't spend enough time on ethics, and that's a mistake because of two reasons. One is ethics is a significant percentage of the exam. This is the second biggest chunk. 15% means that you have 36 questions, 18 in the morning, 18 in the afternoon, and the exam starts with ethics. And if you open your exam well, start your exam well, then that sets the pace for the rest of the exam. The other point is that if you read through how the CFA Institute does its marking and so on, while the process is somewhat ambiguous, but there is some bonus for doing well in ethics. Now, exactly what that bonus is, I'm not 100% sure, but the point is that if you do well in ethics, that is a good thing. So let's give it our best shot. All right, so now in terms of how ethics is organized, I would say that there are three segments. So there are actually 4 readings. The first reading is simply an introduction reading. So this introduces you to the CFA Institute Code of Ethics. And then it also introduces you to the standards. And then it talks about what happens if a standard is violated, or if somebody violates the code and standards, what's the procedure. This reading also talks about the importance of ethics in general, and in particular the importance of ethics in the investment management world. So it's a high-level reading. I don't think it is very testable, but it forms the basis or the foundation for reading 2, which is, I'd say, about 85% of the whole ethics segment. Now, this, I would say, is approximately 5%, and this is just my judgment based on questions that I have seen in the past in the mock papers. So this is the heart and soul of your ethics segment. And I'm going to talk about how to deal with this. And then I'd say the third segment is GIPS, which is covered in readings 3 and 4. All right. So now, how do you deal with the first 2 readings? So these are the Code of Ethics and the Standards of Professional Conduct. My advice in terms of how to prepare. The first thing I would suggest is just listen to the overview video. So if you have access to my YouTube videos from my website, it's the first 2 readings. On my Google Documents space, it's the first reading called Reading 1 Code and Standards. So in this reading, you get an overview. The next part, which is extremely important, is that you should know the standards. So the standards of professional conduct, there are 7 standards, and under each standard there are substandards. So for example, standard 1A is knowledge of the law. Now, you don't need to know that 1A is standard of the law, but you need to know that under standard of the law, what are the main points. As an example, in standard of the law, knowledge of the law, the main points are that you need to know the law. And what is the law? The law is what maybe your government is saying, and then underneath the government, whichever regulatory agency there is, be it the SEC or SECP, whatever the regulatory agency in your country might be, you need to know what they say. Then if you belong to a professional body, and what's our favorite professional body? The CFA Institute. So as people who have signed up for the CFA exam, we also need to know what the CFA Institute says, and we need to follow their rules also. So that's point number 1, to know the law. Point number 2 is, if there is a conflict where the CFA Institute says something that is more strict than what SECP says, then as a candidate, you are supposed to follow the most strict law. So, all right, so now those are the main points. What you need to do is, just like I described knowledge of the law, you need to read this 3-page segment in the curriculum. So this is part of reading 1. And in this 3-page segment, every law is described briefly. So read that many, many times. I'm not saying that totally memorize it, but you need to know it very well. So you need to be able to paraphrase it the way I just paraphrased 1A. So you need to be able to do that for every substandard under every standard. All right, so that's the second thing you need to do. Then the third is that under each standard, such as knowledge of the law, the curriculum will give you some guidance, and that basically is guidance. The standard itself is just a few lines, so it might be 4 or 5 lines. Underneath that standard, there is some guidance that explains or gives an interpretation of what that standard is all about. So you need to know that, and then there are recommended procedures for compliance. So for example, when we talk about knowledge of the law, what must a firm do to ensure that people in that firm comply? And then at an individual level, what must a candidate do to comply with the law? So these are recommended procedures. There are 3 ways to learn these recommended procedures. Now, if you had a lot of time, I would say that you read this from the curriculum. So that's what I generally say. But this is under normal circumstances where you have a lot of time. One might argue that right now we don't have normal circumstances because we don't have a lot of time left. You are already swamped. So maybe reading this from the curriculum you can skip. So what are the other 2 options? Another option is to read from study notes such as Schweser. So only these segments. So read from Schweser, which is a much shorter version. And then the third version, which is the shortest, is to listen to the video lectures. So these video lectures are available. Not only can you just listen to them sitting at your desk, but this is very audio centric. So you can actually have it on your audio device and listen to it on your commute to work or between meetings and so on. So a lot of people do this and save a lot of time. Now, once you have done, say, this third one where you listen to the video lectures for a given standard, so let's say you've done this for standard 1, then actually you can do this for, say, standard 1A. Then what you do is read the examples in the curriculum. So in the curriculum, as I mentioned, first the standard is defined, then for that standard they give the guidance, then they talk about how to, so this part they talk about procedures for compliance. So I'll call this procedures for compliance. So these I said get from the video. And then there will be a segment called application of the standard. Under application of the standard, you are given an example scenario. And then after that example scenario, you will be given a comment on that scenario. Now, for example, under 1A, you might be given a scenario where you work in, say, nation XYZ, and let's say in that country the regulations around, let's say, insider trading are very loose and weak. But you are a CFA institute candidate, so you are then, is it okay for you to do insider trading given that the rules are not clearly specified? So you'll be given this scenario or situation or example, and then you need to comment whether this is a violation of the law with regards to knowledge of the law. And the answer is yes, it is a violation because you need to follow the stricter standard. So I insist that you read these examples, then you think about what the appropriate action should be or whether or not that's a violation of the law, and then read the comment underneath the example. So this part must be done from the curriculum. The reason I emphasize this is that in almost all your exam questions, you'll be given a scenario and you will be asked whether a given standard is being violated or not violated. And as you will find out, these standards or the way the questions are phrased can be fairly ambiguous. So the best way to do this is practice a lot of questions and look at a lot of scenarios. So make sure you do this. I'll highlight this as being extremely important. Then the next extremely important thing, actually just one more comment here. So this you do after listening to the video of every standard or every substandard, depending on how you want to pace yourself. But definitely, at the very least, listen to standard 1, and then do the examples for standard 1. Once you are done with the standards, all 7 standards. Then do the practice problems in the curriculum. So there are about 40 practice problems in the curriculum. So that's a lot of questions. So do these sort of in an exam-like setting. And I would, again, these are minor things, but I would not suggest that you mark your book, because let's say that you do this, you study ethics really hard over the next 4 days, and then you do the questions. So don't mark it in your book, because 3 weeks later, before your exam, I'll want you to do the same questions again, because people have a tendency to make the same mistake multiple times. So I want you to have done these questions 2 or 3 times before the exam. These questions are the best indication of what you will get. So treat them very well. When you do a question, whether or not you get it right, read the answer at the back very carefully, because they give good explanations. So this again is extremely important. Then the next thing is do practice problems from past mock exams. So every mock exam will give you 36 practice questions. So if you are doing mock exams from 2009 onwards, that's essentially 36 times 4. So this again is a lot of practice questions, and these again are great practice questions. The 2012 mock you should not do right now. That, as I keep saying, I want you to do in the last week, where you do that exam as a complete exam. But from 2009, 10, 11, here you can just go separately do the ethics questions for practice. Okay, and the good thing about ethics is it's not changed much since 2009, so the questions will be valid. And then if you still need more practice, then you go to prep provider questions. So this is the Schwezer questions, either from their QBank or from the practice exam volumes, whatever you have, do them. But I mentioned this, do it with a grain of salt, because I think the quality of the questions provided by most prep providers will not be as good as the quality that you will see in the curriculum or in past mock exams. So do these after you've done the mock exams if you still need more practice. Okay, so that is the strategy for reading 1 and 2. Then readings 3 and 4 cover GIPS, which is basically our performance standards, which we'll talk about. Here what you need to do is first listen to the video lectures, all right? And then these readings have a lot of optional segments. So I think if you just skim through those optional segments, you will get a better sense of what GIPS is all about. So listen to the video and then just skim through the reading, and just don't have to spend a lot of time on everything, but skim through the material, including the optional segments. And then also skim through this Appendix 4A, which gives you a sample GIPS compliant presentation. So once you've heard the video lectures, looking at an actual GIPS presentation will help you put some context around what's going on. Now here there are lots of sample presentations. I'd say that you at least carefully go over one of them. It's just 1 page, so sample 1, at least do that. Now very unfortunately, we only have 3 practice problems in the curriculum on GIPS. So for the 2 readings, we only have 2 practice problems. Past papers, past mock exams also don't have many practice questions. So in a way that tells me that it's unlikely that you'll have too many questions on the exam. That's why I think weightage wise within ethics this is relatively low, but you still need to do it. And you unfortunately have to rely on prep provider questions for your additional practice. All right, just a few concluding remarks. I think almost, as in most CFA candidates will find ethics the most annoying topic, because it often seems like of the 3 options, 2 options seem to be right. Okay, I've heard this numerous times. Now that problem can't be totally solved. However, once you've done enough practice and you've read enough solutions presented by the CFA Institute, then if you start thinking like the CFA Institute, then there's a better chance that you can do well on the ethics segment. But having said that, there will still be places where you are not sure about whether it is A or B. In that case, generally I advise that if you've done enough practice, then hopefully your first instinct is good. So go with your first instinct. And unless there is a very good reason to change your answer, just leave it with your first instinct. I've seen many cases where people write something and then have some strange thought and change the answer, and the original answer was right, they changed it to something wrong. So generally go with your first instinct unless there is a good reason otherwise. And I'll still keep saying that there is ambiguity inherent in this topic, so don't get frazzled if you don't have the right answer. What happens in other topics, especially numerical topics, you do some calculation, you get an answer, you see that as one of the options, and you happily bubble it in and move on. Now you might have gotten it wrong because you fell into some trap that was built into that question, but at least you feel good that you came up with a number that you see in the options, you mark it and move on. That doesn't happen with ethics. Very often you bubble in something where you are sort of think that's the right answer, but you're not sure. So don't get frazzled by that slight ambiguity or uncertainty. You just give it your best shot and move on. Don't dwell over it. But again, I'll conclude with what I keep saying: the more you practice, the better. Don't spend too much time trying to read every word, because that just takes too much time, and that also then doesn't stick in your brain. So what you need to do is read the basics, do the examples I talked about, read the examples, but then the more questions you do, the better. So everybody going into the ethics exam should at least have done all the curriculum questions 2 or 3 times, and must have done all the CFA Institute mock exam ethics questions 2 or 3 times. So that's the minimum. Anything above that, go for it if you have time, but at least do the minimum things I talked about. And obviously also having read through all the examples in the curriculum. So that's my suggestion on how to study ethics.